So the next thing that we're going to talk about is how do you recruit people into a study that is about stigmatized behaviors, right? No one is going to show up for a sexual assault research project who has intentionally harmed someone, right? And it might even be hard to find people who want to come in and talk about being sexually assaulted. So what this question points to is that it's not just about what you can't see, but that you have to develop a recruiting strategy that takes into account what people might not want to tell you, or what they might not even have the capacity to articulate. One of the papers that we wrote from the SHIFT data is called "I Didn't Want to Be That Girl," and it's about why people sometimes don't even want to label what they experienced as sexual assault. So as we talk about this question, we're wrestling with how do you look at something about a community and experience that people might have a hard time talking about or not want to talk about.
So I think the first thing we've got to do is take one step back and remember that in the book Sexual Citizens, what we do is put sexual assault in conversation with consensual sex. So this is a real point of departure in our approach compared to what other people are doing and how they think about it, where we sort of talk about how the sexual assaults that we're interested in often emerge from sexual contexts. And so most of the people that we spoke to and that we observed had never been assaulted and didn't have experiences of assault to talk to us about. Nonetheless, this was really important because in order to understand why it was that sexual assaults were happening, we had to see how it was that consensual sex was also happening. The second thing I think in a step back that's important to realize is that it's really important to capture a diversity of perspectives when doing this kind of research. And here we mean the diversity of the people that we're studying, but also the team that studies them. So the we, when we talk about when doing this research, encapsulates a research team of Jennifer, who has this background in a career of studying sex and sexuality, as well as an anthropological background, of me, who's a sociologist, who has studied inequality. But our research team encompassed people with public health backgrounds and a wide range of people who had different sex identities in terms of their sexuality, different racial and ethnic identities, and different approaches to understanding this phenomenon. And the we who brought in students that we interviewed were people who recruited students through our day-to-day interactions. So during the ethnographic research, we would encounter people and we might say to them, would you like to be interviewed? And the diversity of people that we hired at our team helped us construct a diverse sample of people who interacted with those variety of people on campus.
And another thing that we took into account is that people had different reasons for wanting to talk to us. If you think about what we know about sexual assault sort of in the public conversation, think about an iceberg. So the little tiny bit of the iceberg that's above the water are the stories that you read about in the newspaper, or the stories that become adjudicated and where information about those adjudications leaks into the public conversation. But most of the iceberg is underwater, right? And there are reasons that people don't report. And so there's a lot of experiences of sexual assault that that are inaccessible to the institution. And how can you make a plan to prevent something that you can't even see or understand? We also found in the university where we work, the mandated reporting means that students can't tell faculty or other employees who work for the university about any form of gender-based misconduct without the university employees being required to do what's called mandated reporting, to make sure that the students have access to resources, but in a way that students sometimes experience as triggering a process that is out of their control. So all of this is a little bit of preamble, but I think it explains why there was a pent-up demand among students to share their experiences with the university in a way that wasn't going to trigger any investigation process. So the Shift survey at one point over the process of the research, we sent out from the Shift survey email, an email to all of the undergraduates at Columbia, telling them that the survey was going to launch. And we got responses to this institutional anonymous email inbox that said, I want to be interviewed. I have a story to tell. So like, imagine what a pent-up demand to share their story existed for those students to say, I want to tell my story. I want the university to hear me. And I mean, I'll never forget a young woman I was interviewing gripping the arms of her chair and looking me in the eye and saying, I want Lee Bollinger, who was the president of Columbia University, I want Lee Bollinger to hear my story. And so part of this was sort of like the desire to be heard and seen unleashed. So some people came to us with their stories. Others allowed themselves to be recruited, often through a social tie. So our team of ethnographers were amazing, and I think you can't underestimate the value of their social skills in connecting with the students that they met. They were certainly a conduit for recruitment. The undergraduate advisory board was also really important in terms of helping us understand who we should be trying to recruit. We spent many hours meeting with them, talking about the diversity of campus life, not just in terms of the kinds of student identities that we should be recruiting, but in terms of the kinds of spaces our ethnographers should be spending time in, the kinds of clubs and institutions that they should be a part of. You can't even think about designing a sampling strategy until you're in the community and long enough to know what really the relevant forms of diversity. If you think about, I think about ethnographic sampling in relation to like digging your hand into a jar of marbles or jelly beans, right? That like an ethnographic sample is a sample that pulls up a couple of each kind of marble or each flavor of jelly bean. And if the jar is not see-through, you actually like, you can't even know what are the different kinds of marbles or jelly beans in that jar until you're in it. And so the goal is not to get the marbles or jelly beans in a way that is proportional to their distribution inside the jar, but it's just to know like, okay, what are the flavors here? And so we knew from the beginning, for example, that racial diversity was going to be important. But so if we hadn't really listened both to our own intuition in that regard and to what the undergraduate said, if we hadn't also incorporated diversity in relation to race, we would never have been able to see the importance of racial differences in experiences of assault or in men's fears of false accusation. So when you're thinking about capturing, whether it's hidden experiences or just ethnography in general, thinking about the diversity of your sample is really important.
It's also important to know that there are certain things that you're probably not going to see. And so, you know, we didn't do our research in a secretive way. We were very honest about what it was that we were doing. We wanted to talk to people about experiences of sex and sexual assault. And so, you know, if someone really oriented themselves to campus in a way where they were like, I want to commit sexual assault, chances are they weren't going to come talk to us. No matter what we did, that person wasn't going to walk through the door. And so given the ways in which we designed the study, we probably were unable to talk to people who committed sexual assaults as ways that they purposefully wanted to harm somebody. And so there were certain things that we just probably didn't see in the course of doing this research. But that doesn't mean that we didn't see people who committed assaults. In fact, as you'll recall from the book, some of the people that we talked to over the course of the interviews realized that they may have committed sexual assault. And this speaks to the ways in which we conducted our interviews, the ways in which we asked people questions, sought to help them describe their sexual experiences without actually talking about consent, and then reflect on those sexual experiences through the lens of consent only after they'd given us the description. And so we were able to see certain kinds of assault, but probably not other kinds of assault. And so, when you read this book or any other book, it's important to think about, what kinds of people are likely to participate in an interview. How is it that the ways in which these people went about collecting their information influenced the kinds of people that they were able to talk to? And the triangulation that Jennifer talked about earlier helps us capture a little bit more of some of the things that we may have missed with particular kinds of methods. So some of the people who never would have talked to us in an interview, we could nonetheless observe in public life in some ways, and we may be able to capture on surveys.